Over to you, Tom.
Okay, colleagues, hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Show and Tell number 5 for Mapping Services Crisis Response. A quick overview of the team. We've got Ross, who has kindly introduced us and scheduled these show and tells. We've got Harry, who's our lead designer and lead on research. Unfortunately, he's on leave this week, so it will just be me talking to you today. And yeah, Tom, frontline engagement. I've been seconded in from the emergency response team, where my substantive role is an emergency response officer. Really useful use of secondment because it ensures that the project is linked in to the frontline teams that deliver the services. I know many presentations have this punctuated at the start now, but it is sincere. It is a conversation. I wanted to particularly note that as we move towards the end of the project, the broad picture of what we've captured is increasingly coming into focus now. So I feel like we're getting into a space where the specifics really help. So if you do notice potential angles or aspects that might be missing, now is the time to really throw that in, really help the project. I don't want us to get to the end and then miss out some specifics. So I just wanted to make a little note on that. I will add, feel free to use the chat as we progress. Feel free to interrupt me as well. I'm sure Ross will be kind enough to highlight some questions if they're relevant in the chat for me. I can see him nodding. So we're going to progress through these 4 points, starting with working in the open. We have the show and tell every week. This time, really helpful sessions to have. They provide opportunity to have really good discussions, and it's a great opportunity for people that maybe we haven't had direct Zoom conversations with to get their input in as well. And it's really helpful to just keep that open space for people to come and go as they leave. On the left here, you've got our Trello work platform, I guess you could call it. It's open. We've broken it down into this week, next week, complete. You can see our tasks, what we're working on, what we're drumming up next. So if you were so inclined, you could take a look at that. And then on the right here, we've got the live document. I don't plan on sharing it via screen today, but maybe, sorry, Ross, maybe you could just pop that in the chat in case people haven't got it saved anywhere. We do work on it every day and it is growing and changing. And then that's where the services we capture are displayed. We are also blogging about the progress as we go as well. I did a blog just over a week ago about my first week within the team that kind of detailed the shift of thinking I had to do and the importance of mapping. And I believe Ross is due to get one published next week about working in the open. I'd really recommend reading. It's not just a buzzword, it is a way of operating and thinking and completing a project. It's interesting. Why map services? Helps us confirm what service user needs we're meeting now. I mean, we are literally trying to define the services we offer. Identify common tools that we need to deliver current and future services. Good mapping helps us look at the services we offer and we get a glimpse into what we're leaning on, and that can potentially help us in making decisions in the future, whether that's the right software or the right way to do things. Decide where to focus efforts of service design and tech. Once this work's completed, it's going to be a really useful resource to help us display information to decision makers, and also display information to subject experts like product teams that can take a look at what we do and assess how we can maybe do it better or design new products and tech, which is exciting. A clever quote from a clever person within the design industry: understanding your services is the first step towards improving or transforming them. A good way to look at that, or at least how I've been looking at that, is the guiding principle, so to speak, of how we've been moving through mapping and what we're trying to achieve and how we're actually doing that. The insights so far. These insights are pulled from conversations we've had with internal staff and external partners as well. Those that are highlighted here are the people we've spoken to since the last show and tell. I'm quite liking how the list is looking. I think if we pay attention to the regions, I think there might only be 1 or 2 regions missing now, but the point is capturing the main catchment areas of where we provide our services. Most notably, can't see at the bottom there because the presentation actually cuts off for me, but we've got 3 power outage interviewees who we interviewed this week, and I'm going to share some insights that we got from them. Why power outage? Why power outages? Just one of the many services we offer. Last year, or the start of this year, I'm not too confident on the dates, the design team worked on a project that I think was called Mapping Service User Needs. Because of the vast amount of work we've done with people we've supported in domestic fires, rest centres, mass incidents, it was easy for the team to get feedback, get data, and conduct interviews. But by the end of the project, power outages was one of the crises that they hadn't got much data on, hadn't been able to speak to many people about. So there was an opportunity to plug that gap, so to speak, and I guess we got that plug this week. I broke it down into 4 observations and common patterns from the interviews. Emotional, noting that each individual goes through an emotional journey. One of the common ones is when the power outage first happens, the individual instantly thinks, is it just my flat? Is it my house? Is there something wrong with an appliance? Is that an electrical danger? And then that translates into relief once they find it's not just them. Maybe they've discovered that the block of flats is gone. They've spoken to neighbours. They've popped their heads out the window and seen that the street lights have gone as well. And that's just a small part of what could be a much longer and much more protracted incident. I should note that people that we interviewed, they had to have had a power outage for 12 hours or longer. Experiential. So, as with the case with many kind of crises, those that have had power outages before tend to have been more prepared than those that haven't. For example, we'd had one person that's had many before and they've got a cupboard stock full of blankets, flasks, matches, torches, batteries. On the other end, we had someone we interviewed lived in a flat in London who woke up to a pitch black bedroom, no alarm to get up for work, instantly had feelings of, I don't think I'm prepared for this. There's all sorts of bits I need to get. I haven't got any of it. What am I going to do? Vulnerability following that. Any crisis tends to exacerbate or highlight existing vulnerabilities or potentially create new ones, and power outage is no different. A unique vulnerability that I thought was worth talking about was one of the interviewees we were speaking with was part of was a homeowner and part of a community where there was a high rate of burglaries. And this meant that community had a lot of anxiety around that, to the extent where they worked very closely with the local police to keep them informed on comings and goings. And it was just a shared anxiety in that space. And the power outage exacerbated that because their burglary alarms were no longer working. So that, along with the consecutive crisis of being in a pandemic, these things are promote someone feeling isolated. They exacerbate vulnerabilities in people. And then we've got community. A common thread amongst them all was that they all had WhatsApp groups they were part of. And to everyone's surprise, once the power outages happened and they were using it, what was once a dormant chat that some kind-hearted neighbour had set up, perhaps with nice sociable ambitions, now became a really, really useful tool and brought a lot of comfort to people whilst they were experiencing these power outages. What tended to happen was someone who kind of took the initiative to get in touch with the power outage supplier would then relay the information through the WhatsApp group. And then I thought about this quote. I know it's potentially a bit of a leading question in a way, but none of these people had, they weren't people we've supported. We got these interviewees externally. How would you feel if the Red Cross knocked on your door? I think they'd feel really nice. They particularly they particularly highlighted the fact that it would make them feel as though there's other organizations out there that are looking out for them, because the only form of communication they had at this point was those who had subscribed to get text message updates from the power supplier. So that was just, you'd get an automatic response estimating that your power hopefully will come back on in the 4 hours. It is because of a construction error down the road or something. Interestingly, and this is an assumption of mine, not one of the interviewees mentioned phone or the use of mobile phone or decreasing battery, which I presumed would be top of the list. My battery's running out, it's the end of the day, how am I going to do anything? But it didn't come up. So we also spoke to, this was from the previous week, but it's a valuable insight, so I wanted to link into some following insights. The great floods in Doncaster 2019, we were incredibly embedded with the local council. So we spoke to the emergency response team planning manager, and I really enjoying this quote. I've got lots of trained staff. The Red Cross brings something different. Once we started unpacking that, it was about the calmness that we bring. I know, colleague, we're not going to be, we're well aware of how our international brand, that drum gets banged a lot. Well, that's an example of this coming into play. The calmness we bring, it's the warmth we bring, the connections we bring. As a lot of us, we represent the voluntary sector in a lot of our regions as well, which councils don't have those links in with and really value that. And it's the emotional side as well. So not just the emotional support we bring to the service users when we work with the councils in rest centres for the flooding context, it's the support that we bring to their teams as well. I spoke to a psychosocial practitioner earlier this week, and I've got an insight to share from that. But that's a big part of our service, the fact that we don't just support our service users, but at the minute, at least, we're able to support our partners as well, and that's something they value. So we need to keep that in mind with our services, I think. With the emotional side of things, it's kind of shared amongst conversations we've had that it can be challenging to define the humanitarian aid bit of what we do. And I know the tagline that I think many of us are familiar with is we provide emotional support and practical support. The practical support is quite easy to talk about. It's resources like the cash assistance scheme. It's resources like the 2020, the food. It's resources like the clothing we carry on our vehicles. We can quantify that. We can talk about it quite easily. But the humanitarian aid bit gets a little bit more challenging. That emotional support, I mean, emotional intelligence as a concept is hard to define. So emotional support, which is a big part of our offer, can be difficult to define as well. And that's echoed amongst conversations with staff. There's an appetite to define what we do. There's an appetite to have a concrete offer to lean on when we're talking with services, when we're trying to link in with new partners. And this is a new insight. I think it's my favorite one so far. I think it's a really useful one to lean on when we're trying to frame what we do. So on the right here, we've got our two initial phases of our formatting, the mitigating and preparedness. There's a lot going on in there. Plan for floods, fires, power cuts, prepare for floods, fire, power cuts, terrorist attacks. It's a lot of services, and a lot of that work happens behind the scenes. We sit on a lot of LRFs. I haven't been able to put the statistics into the live document yet, but I've got a Excel document that details many LRFs we sit on, or the EPGs for colleagues in Northern Ireland and the I want to say resilience groups for colleagues in Scotland. Absolutely loads of them. And they can take up a lot of time, especially when there's a major incident kicking off. And what I enjoyed from a conversation, from an interview we had, trying to articulate what it is we're trying to do with all this stuff, it can be distilled down into supporting displaced people. So regardless of all the terminology that tends to be associated with the risk registers in our areas, the way individual resilience forums want to plan for them, and the way we're trying to incorporate ourselves into them, it's one goal at the end of that. It's to support displaced people, to support those that are made vulnerable during these crises and these problems when they occur. And that links us into an insight I did talk about last week, but within the workforce, there is this idea that every region operates differently, whether their volunteers are activated by CRCC or not, whether they use rotas, whether they have vehicles, whether their staff structure is more top heavy or whatever it could be. That I've heard all sorts of variables that play into that narrative that I think does exist within the workforce. But similar to the point from the previous slide, the end result is still the same. The end result is trying to get volunteers out there to support partners and support service users. I should have put this quote in a slide, but another conversation I had was someone said we're a resource, and we offer ourselves as a resource to our partners. And I think that's a really helpful frame to look at what we do as well. I had a really interesting conversation with a colleague about their approach to doing good work throughout the COVID crisis. And the way they focused on doing their work was linking in with food banks and partners that were already offering well-defined and functioning services, but had come under increased pressure due to the COVID crisis. And that was kind of their aim for how they operated in their region. And that led to them getting agreements with food banks and giving them 2 volunteers for 3 weeks, Monday to Friday, whilst they could get recruitment undergo, or whilst they could get better inbuilt capacity for themselves. And the result of that was projects that were easy to measure, satisfying for volunteers, because it's just, yep, I'll sign up for this, I'll do it. Partnership working, and it's not frantic, it's controlled. Whereas in other conversations throughout COVID, we can tend to look for anything we can do. And if something is asked of us, we will just whip up some sort of framework, whip up a way. I'm going to try and do this with the capacity I've got, and we're just going to run with it. On the one hand, I think that's admirable, and it is part of our principles because it's dynamic working, but it has consequences. It can be hard to measure. It can be hard to deliver. I just thought that was really interesting. I should have put that in a slide, but I haven't. Great conversation with the team. I really like the psychosocial support team. I didn't realize this, but a lot of their work is based on the research and work of, I believe his name is Stephen Regal. I hope it is. And it's his findings and his work that has allowed the team to go out and deliver training and specialized offerings to external partners like the fire service, like the police, and it's the Resilient Responders program. And I know arguably they're a different team, so is that or not a crisis response offer? But when we're in major incident mode, we're able to offer that support through the crisis response workflow. I'm going to use that word. And that's an incredibly specialized form of support. That's an incredibly specialized service and a unique one. A quote from the conversation was, as a result of that work that Stephen's done, apparently the police force are working on trying to put something standardized in across the country. And this is the Resilient Responders program I'm talking about specifically, and that's because of his work. And the fact that that's come out of the Red Cross, I think it brings a lot of credibility. And it also links into the what I was talking about earlier at the Doncaster Council, the fact that they can you send someone in to provide some sort of training? Because my team are under a lot of stress at the minute, and the things that we've got in place are incredibly organizational and haven't got that warmth that you guys can bring. So I think that's an incredibly unique service, and I don't necessarily know if we frame that correctly or talk about that correctly. I don't know, but I think it's a good insight. These are just some facts that were coming out of conversations that were interesting. Rest centres don't reach everyone, far from it. Doncaster Council is saying that they're not populated in the way that they used to be historically. So they changed the way they approach in working from a rest centre model. I've heard that echoed with internal staff conversations as well, that they aren't as demanding as they used to be. They don't always require that 24/7 capacity anymore because people don't sleep in them. 60% of our calls for fires. I mean, I don't mean that to be possibly annoying for colleagues in the group that are maybe in regions that don't do fire calls much, because I know there are regions that don't. But it's a big part of what we do. No surprise, but I just think it's a really interesting statistic that for the past 3 years, 88% of the food service we've done has been in 2020. And that's an example of how the unique incident we found ourselves in this year has demanded a specific service out of us, and we've just stepped up and cracked on and covered a lot of numbers because of it. Feeding the beast, also known as administrative burden. Insights that we're kind of getting is that the administrative burdens that we're operating under can detract from the work we actually want to do. They can make it more difficult, make it more challenging. And that has an impact on the quality of work we can do. And there's this idea that Harry, the lead designer, probably articulates much better than me, but I'll attempt it anyway. Systems now in how they're working could perhaps be seen as documentation is the doing, whereas our systems need to empower us, and our technology and software need to empower us and help us to actually achieve the goals that we want to achieve. So ideally, in a future system, doing is the documentation as opposed to documentation being the doing. That's it for insights. And our next steps, got more people to chat to. I'd welcome more people to come forward as well. I'm on the cusp of getting people to talk to from the fire service. They really want to make sure that they give me exactly what I'm looking for. Adding more statistics to the services, such as LRS we sit on, the amount of resources we provided, etc. Refine our service definitions more. So those services that sit within those categories, mitigation, preparedness, response and recovery, get them more refined as we get towards the end of the project. And then volunteer engagement as well. So I think next week, myself and Ross on Wednesday are going to host an evening show and tell session for volunteers. So it'll be good to get their insight and make them more directly aware of what it is we're doing. That's it as far as the presentation goes. So I'll pause there for any questions. I'm going to also get everyone's faces up as well so I can read the room. What do we think? Any common, has anyone noticed something I'm interested in, the fact that rest centres seem to be changing, has anyone else noticed any changes in the landscape that we operate on like that, perhaps?
I think it's interesting that the changes we've seen in the central area, we're seeing the same things in different parts of the country. So it would suggest that kind of much broader trends. And I think it's valuable that your piece of work is confirming that, because we're guilty actually of the areas not talking to each other as much as we should, perhaps sort of at the service level, at the more direct kind of level, it tends to be management that coordinate a bit more. So yeah.
That was coming out as well. There are certain regions that don't feel like communication is getting to them in the way that they'd like. I couldn't argue the specifics on that, but it was something that's been echoed. I've seen the chat firing off, but I haven't seen anything in there yet. Is there anything worth?
There's a few good insights, but I'm just cautious that we've now hit 4 o'clock.
Oh God, yeah, I've spoken for too long.
So there's been some great bits of comments in the chat. Really appreciate that. Just to really wrap up, I mean, you're more than welcome to stay on and chat to us if you want, but I appreciate how busy everyone is. It'll be next, what did I say, next Wednesday evening, we're going to do the volunteer show and tell. We're going to push this out to volunteers through the Facebook groups and the volunteer reps, and I'll also email out to all the ER staff if you're able to encourage teams if they wish to come, and if there is any of the ER teams themselves that want to come and support us, so have a united front, not just something that we're going off and doing ourselves, then that would be super helpful. But I appreciate how busy everyone's working, so giving up some time in the evening isn't ideal, but we know that that's obviously when volunteers are more able to engage with us. So yeah, we're going to capture everything that's in the chat because that's super important. Thank you so much. If you do have time, if you've got any reflections you want to stay on for them, please do. But otherwise, thank you very much to everyone else. And I'm going to stop the recording now.